Apple has just significantly changed the game when it comes to mobile photography, and it might not be for the reason that you think. As a pro photographer and videographer, I'm always super excited to see what changes Apple is announcing in their latest batch of iPhones, because let's be honest, the iPhone camera is probably the most popular camera on the planet, so it's of course super interesting to see what Apple are doing. They just announced some very interesting things. I'm going to keep this kind of photography and video centric, so these are the things that matter to me as a photographer. First of all, I actually think it's just really funny the way Apple always say things like this is the best iPhone ever, or this is the best iPhone camera lens ever, because like, it's the new iPhone. Surely things would be really bad if you were releasing something that was worse than it was the previous year. Anyway, like last year, we have two variants of phones, the iPhone 15 and the iPhone 15 Plus. These are very similar, just one is of course bigger than the other size. And then we have the Pro versions, or as Tim Cook put it,
the most pro iPhone we've ever created.
So the iPhone 15 Pro and the iPhone 15 Pro Max, these are obviously the more expensive variations with more pro features crammed inside. And these are when you're going to find the best camera systems available on the iPhone. But it's very exciting this year, the iPhone 15 itself wasn't left behind, so let's start with that one. So for anyone that decides to go normally for the slightly cheaper variant, the iPhone 15 model, you'll be super happy to hear that the 48 megapixel sensor available from the iPhone 14 Pro is coming to the standard iPhone 15 model and the iPhone 15 Plus model. So that's a massive win for everyone with that model of phone. The 48 megapixel main sensor on the iPhone 14 Pro is absolutely brilliant, so it's fantastic to see that tech coming down and trickling down to those slightly more affordable models. Because of that 48 megapixel sensor size, it also enables Apple to be able to do a 2x zoom on the standard iPhone 15 variant. This basically is using a center crop of those 48 megapixels and allowing you to digitally zoom. It's actually quite a lot better than just a standard digital zoom because Apple does a whole bunch of AI and post-processing on this photo, and it actually does do a really good job. I've always been super pleased with the 2x on the iPhone 14 Pro, so again, this is a fantastic feature to see on the iPhone 15. Apple is changing the way they're doing pixel binning. For anyone that doesn't know, pixel binning is the process of taking those 48 megapixels and actually reducing those down to a more manageable file size. Previously, they've been pixel binned into 12 megapixel files, but what's interesting this year is we're actually seeing an increase to 24 megapixel files. So it doesn't look like the images are going to be 12 megapixel anymore on the iPhone 15 and up. This is super interesting. When I get my hands on the phone, it's going to be interesting to see how it kind of manages the file size to performance difference, whether it actually looks any different from the 12 to the 24, all of that kind of good stuff. But this is a promising step. From what I can tell at the moment, shooting full 48 megapixel resolution is still reserved for those Pro models. So on the iPhone 14 Pro, you can shoot in ProRAW and you can choose to shoot at full 48 megapixel full resolution. You'll still be able to do that, I'm sure, on the iPhone 15 Pro, but that feature is not available, I don't believe, on the iPhone 15 and iPhone 15 Plus. Some really cool changes to portrait mode. I don't use portrait mode a ton. You guys know how I tend to feel about portrait mode, but lots of people do like to use it, and this feature and this change is fantastic. And basically what it means is that Apple will recognize when there's a person, or actually it works with dogs and cats as well, but they will recognize when an individual is in the frame, and it will actually store that portrait mode data and to be able to use that later. So you could go back to that image and decide to use portrait mode. When they first announced it, I kind of sounded like it was going to just auto apply portrait mode and maybe like suggest you to change to the portrait mode section of the app when you're shooting a photo with a person in it. I'm glad to say that's not how it's working. It's like you'll just take a photo and you'll be able to apply a portrait mode effect afterwards. For any Android users out there, you will not be impressed at this because this has been a feature on many Android phones for a long time, but you're able to now change the focus area on portrait mode shots, so that's a good change too. In terms of processing, this is going to be running on the A16 Bionic chip, which is from, again, the iPhone 14 Pro. You're kind of sensing a theme here. They're just bringing a lot of the features available from last year's Pro model available onto the cheaper iPhone 15. Let's talk now about the iPhone 15. First things first, the phone is really quite beautiful. Like, it's definitely not massively different to last year's generation in terms of design, but the titanium alloy that they're using for the chassis really does look quite nice. I'm probably going to go for the kind of titanium raw version, showing the kind of organic state of the titanium. Definitely looks like a nice color. In terms of cameras though, this is the first year we're actually getting a difference in functionality from the camera camera systems from the iPhone 15 Pro and the iPhone 15 Pro Max. So previous years, it's only basically been the screen size and the battery. Those have been the only differences. On the standard Pro, we have the same collection of lenses as last year. So that is a 13mm, that's the ultra wide. Then we have a 24mm, that is the main rear-facing camera, that 48 megapixel sensor. And then we have a 77mm 3x zoom. Like I said, that 24mm is still that 48 megapixel sensor, even though Apple this year says it's been improved, but they didn't give any specifics as to what that improvements are. So I guess we'll just have to kind of test this and actually see whether it actually has improved. And now we get to my favorite feature of this new camera release. And it's actually a more simple feature than you might imagine. And it's definitely a feature that I think is going to be overlooked. But it's the fact that Apple is allowing customizations of the main focal length for the main rear-facing camera. So right now on the iPhone 14 Pro, you have a 48 megapixel sensor at 24mm. And you kind of only have this choice. And you can obviously digitally crop and kind of digitally enhance or zoom in after the fact, but the kind of standard photo out of it will be 24mm. Apple is allowing us to customize this year, and we're going to be able to shoot at 24, 28mm, and 35mm. And that 35mm is my absolute favorite focal length as a photographer, especially when I'm taking travel photos. I end up shooting the 35 a lot on any camera that I actually have. So we're going to be able to digitally change our focal length to 35mm and also set that as the default camera app on that main rear-facing camera. So you can change that to a default to always shoot at 35mm. This is a fantastic change. I actually experienced something similar on the Xiaomi Leica phone. You could shoot in 35 on that camera, but there was always a filter applied, and I was like, why didn't they just allow you to always shoot at 35? So excited that Apple has actually made this change. The volume switch is finally gone on the iPhone because that kind of just didn't really add anything to anyone's life at this point. They've changed it to an action button, and the kind of relevance for us as photographers is you could change this so that you could hit it or hold it, and you'd be able to launch the camera app just by hitting that button. So that's a really cool change, very, very fast, hopefully an opening way of the camera app. Another thing they noted is improved glare performance. They talked about lens coatings and that type of thing. They kind of did gloss over, pardon the pun, gloss over some of this stuff. But glare has always been a massive, enormous issue on the iPhone, and hopefully this is a step in the right direction about going towards fixing that. So like I said, this is the first time we're seeing a difference in terms of camera performance from the 15 Pro and the 15 Pro Max. So what is that difference? It's actually a new additional lens on the iPhone 15 Pro Max. Because of the extra size on the phone, it's allowing Apple to place an extra sensor, or kind of more like light sensor, on the back of the camera system on the 15 Pro. And because of the extra space on the 15 Pro Max, Apple is kind of somehow able to magnify some of the light into that 77mm sensor, and is allowing them to basically replicate a 120mm focal length. So we're going from a 0.5x, a 1x, a 2x digital, a 3x optical, and a 5x optical, even though it's not like a true optical. So that will be super interesting to see in terms of how it actually does perform in the real world. 120mm is not focal length I tend to use very often. I've shot on the Pixel 7 Pro a bunch, and I kind of didn't use the zoom as much as I actually end up using the zoom on the 77mm 3x. So it's good that we've got the choice of going 3x, and they haven't just kind of gone and replaced the 3x telephoto with the 5x telephoto. So obviously it's more options for us as creatives and as iPhone shooters. So it's always a good thing. And like I said, I'm just interested to see how that lens actually performs, considering it's not a true optical lens. There were some very interesting video features announced kind of near the end of the camera section. I've mainly focused on photos, but I do have to mention them. First of all is a feature called spatial video, and this is really interesting, and I think definitely could actually be a progression for kind of video as a whole, as a kind of an industry standard. We've obviously seen Apple launch the Apple Vision Pro, or talk about the Vision Pro a lot. What this is enabling you to do is use both of your iPhone lenses simultaneously, so the ultra wide, I believe, and the main rear-facing camera, and then it's using those two lenses simultaneously to create almost like a depth map of your scene, and then that will allow people watching through a Vision Pro to basically like be inside that video themselves or kind of experience it on a much more real basis. Kind of mind-blowing. Like, it was quite a quick thing in the presentation, but like this has real repercussions for kind of the future of videography and video creation. I'm definitely not doing it justice with this kind of very quick segment, but this is a fascinating subject and it's going to be really interesting to see how this develops. For anyone that uses iPhones on a slightly more professional production scale, I know that obviously there are creative agencies that use iPhones because their clients want that kind of real and organic look. You're going to be able to shoot in ProRes video in log format now, and that goes all the way up to 4K 60 frames per second. So these are some really good changes to ProRes video on the iPhone, particularly that log change. It's going to allow creatives to massively grade the iPhone footage, whereas previously kind of the grading and color grading has been really limited. Even in that ProRes format. Shooting log just means you can kind of match it to other cameras and it will just end up looking far better. Another change is that you're actually going to be able to shoot directly to a drive using the new USB-C port. Obviously, as you create these ProRes files and they're quite large, you can basically just hot swap drives and just kind of be shooting to external drives, which is a massive win as well. There was a whole bunch of other announcements through this event. They kind of throw in a lot of comments like night mode is significantly better, but obviously these are kind of totally unquantifiable because they're not kind of telling us any reasons for those improvements. So as always, it's going to be super interesting to get the phones in our hands. That will be coming within the next couple of weeks. I'm going to be testing out these phones thoroughly. So stick around for that. I would love to hear your thoughts on these announcements down below in the comments.